right. Welcome, everybody, to our Dharma talk today. Giving our opening talk is Bobby Abraham. Bobby Abraham is a resident at the Cambridge Zen Center and a Dharma teacher in the Quantum School of Zen. In 2025, he sat the full 90-day Kolche retreat up in the Providence Zen Center monastery up there. Let's see. He currently works as an integration and test engineer for a nonprofit promoting the adoption of ranked choice voting. Bobby, thank you for your introductions. And answering questions today is Zen Master Tan Gong. I'm getting there. The ZMs are all at the bottom of the list. I know, but I know, Bobby, ranked choice. Maybe we can talk about this. I'm getting. All right. Oh, there he is, Zen Master Tan Gong, José Ramírez. Zen Master Tan Gong is a co-guiding teacher of our Providence Zen Center and the guiding teacher of the Delaware Valley Zen Center, which he helped establish in 1999. He began studying Zen with Zen Master Dae Kwang, sitting over here somewhere, at the Providence Zen Center in 1994, receiving Inka, which is full authorization to teach, in 2009, and Dharma transmission from Zen Master Dae Kwang on April 1st, 2023. As an industrial statistician, he works with engineers and scientists to help them make sense of data. He lives in Rhode Island with his wife and daughter. So thank you both for appearing. And I have to walk across you again. So.
Good to go. Okay. Hi, I'm Bobby. I did sit the full 90 days of Kyolche up at the monastery. When I tell people about it, I usually get two kinds of reactions. If somebody is familiar with practice and familiar with long retreats, they'll be really excited for me, and they'll be like, how was it? What did you get out of it? If somebody is not so familiar with practice and not familiar with long retreats, a really common response is, why would you do that? It's a good question, because the why is really important. When we have a retreat, I think there are three things that dictate what our experience is going to be, whether it's 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 3 months. One, your intentions for the retreat, or why you're sitting it in the first place. Two, your intentions or the why around what your practice is in general. And three, the rest of your karma that you bring in with you to the retreat. As I was figuring out how I wanted to talk about this huge experience I had, I thought these three things would be kind of a useful frame to talk about it. And I'll take them in reverse order. So karma, the way we like to talk about it in this school, it's all of the experiences that we've accumulated over the course of our lives that have shaped our current condition, that dictates how we are going to act in the situation we find ourselves in this current moment. So we are born in some part of this world of a certain ethnicity, in a certain socioeconomic status, to some kind of family. We are raised, we have experiences, good and bad. We start making decisions for ourselves at some point and have experiences from that, good and bad. And these things shape our personalities. It shapes our likes and dislikes. It shapes the goals that we think we need to pursue. And it shapes the narrative we have in our heads that kind of talk about our lives and ruminate about what's going on. And before we start practice, we have the delusion that all of these things are us, and it's what we are. And we take these experiences and we create stories out of them to describe our lives to other people. And these stories can be useful, they can be instructive, they're good for Dharma talks. And as I was reflecting on how do I answer, why I practice, I was trying to pick out a good story for that. But when I was thinking about it, I think the story is less important than the feeling of it. So from where I am right now and just reflecting on how it felt before I started practicing, it felt like, in retrospect, I was treading water in a really stormy sea, just really desperately trying to keep my head above water. And sometimes life would be going well, and my head would be above water. And sometimes life would be going not so well, and my head would be completely underwater. And when I discovered practice, that was the first time in my life where I had something to hold on to, just something to just stabilize me a little bit. And that was a fantastic discovery. And for a long while, I did a lot of solo practice to help stabilize me. And my practice proceeded in fits and starts. When things were going well, practiced less. When things were not so well, kind of reached out for the thing that stabilized me. Years and years later, this would have been end of 2018, I was going through a divorce, and that was an extremely stressful, destabilizing event. And at the time, I was deeply depressed, and my coping mechanisms were smoking a ton of weed, binge watching shows, and binge eating. And I was terrified that if I didn't do something to intervene, I'd lose like another 10 years of my life just in that pit. So I was familiar with Zen already, and I was familiar with the Cambridge Zen Center. I maybe would show up 4 times a year for the Dharma talks. But I knew that they had 2-day retreats every month. So I needed a stronger anchor than my solo practice. So I decided in that life transition, I would just go to every single 2-day retreat just to stabilize myself. So I went to my first retreat, and it was not easy. It was the longest I ever sat in my life. And I was familiar with sitting, but I was not familiar with other practice forms. So, at the end of the day, there was this chanting. I didn't know the chants, and I had strong likes and dislikes around that. We do full prostrations in the middle of some of the chants, and I just thought to myself, oh, we're going down again. Oh, coming up. And then, Sunday morning, 108 bows. I was not in very good shape back then, so middle of the bows, I was just sweating and embarrassed that the front of my cushion was just soaked with my own sweat. In future retreats, I took the hand towel that they give you, and I just put it in front of my cushion, so there was something to soak up my sweat. At the towards the end of the first day, it goes until 9:40 p.m. So maybe around 4 p.m. No, it was after dinner. I had already been sitting all day. We do chanting after a break after dinner, and the chants feel like they take forever. So I was like, when is this going to be over? When is this going to be over? And then we get to sitting, and I just knuckles clenched, just really trying to get through the end of it. But I heard sometime later from another teacher, not of this tradition, I think his name is Shinzen Young. It's more of a mindfulness practice. But he likes to describe retreats as sort of like a vaccine, where we are intentionally putting ourselves in an uncomfortable situation, in a controlled environment, to get us used to dealing with that discomfort and get used to finding equanimity in that discomfort. Because when life inevitably throws us in uncomfortable situations, that experience of dealing with that discomfort becomes something to steady ourselves. And over time, as you keep sitting retreats, it becomes more and more bearable because you know what's happening, you develop a lot more patience. And what I found from there is I'm sitting, and you're just looking into your mind the entire time. And that's when I talk about your experience being dictated by the rest of the karma you bring in with you. That's when your karma comes up. And every little thing about your life starts arising, and you get to look at it. And as you keep practicing, and you start looking at these experiences, you're not supposed to think. And when you catch yourself thinking, you return yourself to your breath. Start thinking, you return. And that process of returning over and over again, it strengthens this muscle that allows us to separate ourselves from our thinking and just really looking at it. And when I talked about our karma, our set of experiences, our likes and dislikes, our personality, when we sit, we start to see that there's something about us that's below, apart from, more fundamental than all of those things. I found that sitting in that space of don't know, as this school likes to call it, allows us to access our innate wisdom. And I would have insights about how to deal with problems in my life. Not by explicitly thinking about it, but just them arising while I was sitting. And I don't know, it being the last thing in my computer before returning to my breath. It's as if we're accessing the same thing that is popping up when we sleep on a problem. Short question. How long is this talk?
20 minutes.
20 minutes. Cool. Yeah. The first time I experienced this feeling of insight, I was having a conflict with my father. He is the patriarch of our family, and he's also very insecure. I was getting married at the time, so this was when I was still doing solo practice. And we come from a conservative Catholic family. We were not getting married in that tradition. He was upset about it. And 5 months before our wedding, my sister came out about the fact that she was dating somebody outside of her culture, and he kicked her out of the family. And I leapt to her defense in the only way that I knew how. So, I called him a bad parent, a hypocritical Christian, yada, yada, yada. Didn't help. And the end result of that was he told the rest of my family not to show up to my wedding. And I wasn't fond of my family, so I didn't care so much. But my fiance at the time would have been really hurt if nobody showed up. So I was sitting to stabilize myself because I had that resource. And sitting, trying to figure out how to get my dad to come back to my wedding. And because I hadn't sat retreat yet, and because I hadn't talked to teachers in the school, I didn't realize this, but what I was doing was I was holding a question. It's a technique that we use in the school, where that was the thing I cared about as I kept returning to my breath. And at a certain point, for the first time in my life, I felt something arise. And it was just the sentence, "Don't fight." I was like, oh, what does "don't fight" mean? So I go to my dad, and it was completely cynically at first, but I apologized for everything I thought would make sense to apologize for. And I didn't ask for any apologies in return. But I noticed that as I lowered the temperature and did what was correct for me in that situation, he softened. And as he softened, I softened. And long story short, he did end up coming to my wedding. He did let my sister back into the family. He eventually went to her wedding too. But that moment of experiencing "don't fight," that was that first experience of connecting with what's underneath, connecting with what this school calls "don't know mind." So years and years later, as I started doing these retreats, I started connecting with that more often. And at a certain point, it stopped becoming, it's always been a source of stability for me, but then there was also this, what is that? If I am not my personality, if I am not my mental narrative, if I'm not my likes and dislikes, what am I? What is this thing that I'm accessing when I'm sitting? And that curiosity started driving me a little bit more. So when people ask, like, why would you sit a 3-month retreat? I just knew from 2-day retreats, I had space and time to go deeper. And at one point, I did a 1-month retreat, and that gave me even more space and time to go deeper. And I just wanted to see what would arise if I did a full 3 months. And there's a lot of things that happened during the retreat, and there's a lot of things I could share, but I could say maybe the most useful or maybe formative part about that retreat was every week there's a new teacher, usually. And I loved it because there's a fresh perspective, there's a fresh energy. Also, most people don't sit the full 3 months. There's just me and Manil Sanim were the only people that were there all 3 months. Some people, maybe did 2 weeks to 4 weeks, but it's usually a fresh set. And the teacher will give an opening statement. When they get there, a closing statement, they'll give a Dharma talk. And week 5, it was Dennis Sturmeyer, Jada Popesanim. And during his Dharma talk, he shared a story about challenges that he had with his father. And he talked about how he was afraid of having kids because he was worried something about that experience would get passed down to his kids. But he ended up having kids, loved it, and realized that this feeling that he had about his father, that was something he just needed to deal with and let go of. So he talked to the founding teachers and Master Sung Sung, and he said, hey, I have this feeling about my dad, like, what can I do about it? And Sung Sung said, chant for your father. So he says, well, my father's dead. And Sung Sung said, no problem. 49 days, Jijang Bosal chanted 3,000 times a day. So he said that he got a mala, figured out how many times around was 3,000, and on his drive to work and back, he would just do Jijang Bosal, Jijang Bosal, Jijang Bosal. And he didn't give details about his experience, but he said at the end of the 49 days, there was a release. So I heard this story, and I also reflected the fact that during my retreat experience, one of the things that came up, the karma I brought in with me, was this rage that I had about my father and my parents. Around, just constantly being gaslit, them never taking accountability. And at that point, I'd put distance between me and my family, and it was really healthy. And, I wasn't being actively harmed about it anymore, but there was this thing that I was still holding that I needed to let go. So I heard Dennis's story, and I thought to myself, well, next week is intensive week. Maybe I should chant for my father. Kwansim Bosal, Kwansim Bosal. Jijang Bosal is a chant that this school does for people that have passed away. Kwansim Bosal is people that are suffering, that are still alive. I thought about doing that, and something deep inside me said, no effing way. And the only way I could convince myself to chant for my father was to promise myself after the retreat that I would not contact him for 1 year, because I was terrified that out of some post-retreat high, I'd just be, love is all is forgiven, don't worry about it. And that wouldn't be true. So once I made the promise to myself, whatever part of myself was resisting, let go a little bit, and I was able to do that chant. So intensive week is, the normal retreat schedule is already intense. You wake up at 4:30, you practice all day until 9:30 at night. You have a 1 hour break after each meal. Intensive week, it's that schedule, but then you sleep for 2 hours, and around midnight you wake up and practice for 2 hours and sleep until 4:30. And there's something about practicing in the middle of the night that just really hits you in the middle of your sleep cycle and penetrates deeper. So for all of those sitting periods during that intensive week, it's just Kwansim Bosal, Kwansim Bosal, Kwansim Bosal. And first it was for my dad, then it was for my dad and mom, and then it was for everybody else in my family that were particularly challenging. And over the course of the week, I just started to see that they were all trapped in this hell, torturing each other, and that I had chosen to remove myself from that hell. And I kept chanting, and over the course of the week, I started to appreciate the fact that my grandfather was likely a terror. And my dad was only doing what he knew, and he was only acting from his own experiences. And I was appreciating that this is generational trauma, and the ways in which I experienced my relationship with him wasn't okay, but it was a result of a process that my father wasn't fully in control of. And at the end of that week, my rage had subsided to regular anger. Like, it's still not okay, but it's not as hot, and it doesn't bother me as much. And I talked to Kwan Hang Sneem, he was teaching intensive week, about it later, and he mentioned that, chanting is really powerful, and people in the West don't really appreciate how powerful chanting can be. And for 3 months, I just got to enjoy all the practice forms that this school has. So, sitting, just looking deep, seeing what arises, returning to breath over and over again. Chanting, just being in the sound with everybody else in the room. It's a way of releasing energy. And bowing. Bowing meditation is fantastic, especially if you're really emotionally activated because your body is moving. You kind of move stuff through. And Kongan interviews. I won't go too deep into them, but it's a practice form where a teacher will present a situation to you, and you have to understand the situation, understand your relationship to everything in that situation, and figure out what the correct action is. And every single one of these kongans has a hook to maybe trick you into logical thinking. And you're supposed to avoid the hook and just react. And it teaches you to just see the situation plainly and not to make anything. And when you first start doing it, they don't make sense. And you will answer, I don't know. And the teacher will say, good. And when I first started, I thought the teacher was just trying to make me feel better about being bad at kongans. And I really didn't appreciate that that experience of don't know is actually the most important part of the process. Getting comfortable not knowing, which is contrary to how we're raised, because when we're in school and we don't know the answer, it's a bad thing and we feel bad about ourselves. But when we learn to be comfortable in that don't know space, our mind is clear, and when I talked about earlier, accessing my inner wisdom, that's when we're able to do it. And eventually, if you start answering kongans, they're wonderful because they have these beautiful teachings about, how we act in relationship to teachers and other people in our lives, how to react in the matter of bodhisattva, where we're, naturally sharing and oriented towards helping. And yeah, just kind of seeing the world plainly and reacting to it. And what I especially like about it is the school, the teachings aren't given to you. You have to find it for yourself. So for 3 months, I got to enjoy all of that and cultivate all of that. And 3 months later, I get out, and I heard from people oh, you're different. And I couldn't quite grok what was different about myself because my personality feels more or less the same and the way I act feel more or less the same. But I think 3 months of just separating myself from that karma, I learned at the very least how to give conflicts a little bit more space. That was something I couldn't do before. And I just feel more at peace. And I have a better sense of how to listen to my gut and follow my gut instinct to proceed in my life. So, if you haven't sat a retreat before, I highly recommend it. You don't have to do 3 months off the bat, and I really don't recommend doing that as your first retreat. Do 2 days, see how it hits you. And if you get the opportunity during winter Kyolche, you could do just 1 week. And it's an amazing experience. During summer Kyolche, you could do 1 week, and I think even less than that, maybe just a few days.
3 days.
3 days. And it's just an opportunity to go deeper, look inside, and find out for yourself. Thank you all for listening to my talk.
Thank you for sharing your experiences.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
any questions that you may have. Bobby did a great job explaining how practice works and all the different forms of practice that we have, and also gave us an insight on how you can use some of that practice in your life. Yeah? Because we sometimes have all these ideas about practice, of something that we want, you know, this enlightenment experience, the stuff that they talk about or you read in the books. Yeah? That sounds pretty awesome. Yeah. What I sometimes used to call the, X-ray vision, I'm going to fly when I attain nirvana or enlightenment. But it's more practical than that. So. See, you did a great job. We're done.
Talking about our practice in this before thinking mind, I've heard people say that you can intellectually hear it over and over and over again. You can intellectually think you understand it. Nancy Hedgepeth, Jada Popesanim used to use the example of a banana. You can describe it all day long, but until you actually peel it and taste it and go, there it is. Can you talk about maybe the right effort, concentration, when you haven't tasted it yet, but you keep trying, you keep looking for it, you think you got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. So a question is related to experience. So Zen is about experience. We always mention that. And one of our favorite questions is, what are you doing right now? Teachers ask that question. Yeah. And it's interesting when you watch people, because for a lot of us, when they ask that question, it triggers a whole bunch of things. Not this moment, not this experience, but yeah. And you can see that. Yeah. So, talking about an experience is not the same as an experience, because my experience maybe it's similar, but it's not your experience. It's not going to be your experience. So, use the banana. You can use anything. Yeah. You can use something more exotic that you may not be familiar with, like dragon fruit. Yeah, it's a pretty cool looking fruit. It's very nice color outside, like reddish fuchsia type, and it has some things that are like a pineapple. And you notice when you start describing these experiences, you either use something that is similar or something that is the opposite. Yeah, because it's hard to explain some of these things. Yeah, and that's the same thing with the Zen stories. You read stuff about whatever, insight, enlightenment, or this, and there are stories about it's not this, or maybe it's like this. Yeah. I can tell you, if you cut a dragon fruit, it's white, really white inside. It has black dots. Yeah, the seeds. Yeah, and a thick skin. Yeah, that you cannot eat, but you can scoop that out. Yeah, and it has a very unique flavor. Yeah, it's kind of like juicy, like a watermelon, but it's not a watermelon. And if you had a dragon fruit, then you understand immediately. Oh, talking about a dragon fruit. But if you haven't had a dragon fruit, then it's just ideas in your mind that I'm planting in there. Yeah. Those narratives that Bobby talked about, we have a lot of those in our head all the time. Yeah. So the best thing, and so you used to say that, just go get a dragon fruit, cut a piece, put it in your mouth. Then it's your experience of a dragon fruit. But that's the same with anything. Yeah. So talking about practice and the retreat and all that is great. And if you sat Kilche, then you understand. At a different level, yeah. If you haven't sat that, then you get some understanding. Maybe you have done some meditation, maybe you have read, but it's not the same thing as sitting that retreat. And going through that setup as that teacher that you mentioned. Yeah. All these are hacks, situations that have been created for thousands of years to help this process. In our everyday life, especially now, it's very hard to see that, because we're always distracted. Always, yeah. So it's very hard to see that. Yeah. But in these retreats, you get disconnected from things, and it's just pretty boring. It's just the same thing over and over and over again. You get up at the same time, eat the same food, do the same thing. Imagine for 90 days. Yeah. But then that form gives you some freedom. And that's the paradox. A lot of us don't like forms, so we can have some reaction to all these practices and things. Yeah. But they have their function. Yeah. So part of that is just, to use the cliche in the Quantum School of Zen, just do it. Grab that and experience that. Yeah. And you can have an intellectual understanding, and a lot of us have, but until you do it, it's not your thing. It's not your thing. And that's why, as Bobby was saying, if you have the time and aspiration to do it, then just do it. Try it. Do a one-day retreat. We have one-day retreats too. And that gives you a slightly longer experience at the practice. On Wednesday, on a Wednesday night or today, you get to practice for a whole hour. Yeah. That may be a little longer than you normally practice in your everyday life. Yeah. But if you practice a day, then, and again, depends on how you are and your personality. Some of us like to start, one day, and then you progress. Yeah. Some people just show up for a 90-day retreat. And even the hardcore practitioners are like, whoa. Really? But that's also possible. But so it points to experience. That's a long answer to pointing to experience. So Zen is like that. Zen is like that. So if you look at the Buddha, then you have, the teachings of the Buddha, the actions of the Buddha, and the mind of the Buddha. So some Sanim used to say, if you want to understand the Buddha's action, then follow the precepts. Yeah. If you're going to get an understanding of the Buddha's words, then study the sutras. But if you want to attain the Buddha's mind, then practice Zen. Yeah. Very nice way of advertising Zen. Yeah. And you have the different traditions. The Theravada monks are really into the sutras. Yeah. That's fine. And then the Vinaya school, they're really into the precepts and all that. And Zen puts a little more emphasis on the training. It's not that the other two things are not important. Yeah. And in this training, that's where the experience is.
I've noticed in my practice, from one day to the next, things can be, practice can feel easier, feel harder. My life isn't substantially different from one day to the next, but for some reason I struggle with practice. And so, but then I guess I also notice too, when it is easy, the same number of thoughts are popping into my head as when it's difficult. It's just sometimes when practice is difficult, whatever I'm bringing to that practice that day, it's harder to let go of those things. And so when we're having that day, whether it's just had an anxious day or whatever, you're struggling for some reason, what are the tools we can use to be able to struggle through that and make it? I feel like when the day is good, it's easier to accept those things, to be okay with it. But when I'm having a bad day, I feel like I'm beating myself up about not being able to let go. And so how do we let go of those thoughts when we're practicing, when we're struggling with the days we have hard time practicing? Thank you.
Yeah, you notice that some of the us are smiling or laughing a little bit because that's part of the process. We struggle with that. And if you see retreat for a longer period of time, you see that. Bobby alluded to that. And he also alluded that when life was good, then practice gets to relax a little bit. Yeah. And sometimes when practice is hard, you may get into that practice more. So yeah, that's our life, that's our practice. I used to do the Buddhist Christians retreat with Father Hunt, which is now retired. He just turned 92 last week. And one day a student came for an interview, and Father Hunt asked his student, "How's life?" And the student said, "Well, ups and downs." And right away, Father Hunt said, "Oh, that's the practice." So you're lucky because you're experiencing the ups and downs, and that's the practice. Yeah, that's the practice. Yeah. But then there's this piece about the letting go, so the Buddha talked about the Four Noble Truths. That's the teaching of the Buddha, dukkha and the end of dukkha. Yeah. And we tend to use the word dukkha because the translation is suffering, which is a little heavy, and it's like. Sometimes we use unsatisfactory, or imperfect. And what he says, there is suffering. Yeah, that's the statement. That's the first noble truth. Yeah. He got transformed into life is suffering, but the statement was, there is suffering. But then there are two other components to that sometimes people don't talk about. Then he said, this suffering has to be understood. And then you really have to realize, yes, this has been understood. So understanding suffering is interesting. Yeah, we realize, there is suffering. We can feel it, the basic level of pain and all that, and family relationships, all that stuff. Yeah, co-workers, other people in your circle, other human beings. Yeah. But there are other levels of suffering that the Buddha talked about. And he also mentioned that, the cause of suffering is ignorance and this desire. And he also mentioned that the desire has these two components. A desire to become, I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to be a better Zen student, a better Zen master, a better husband, a better whatever, better human being, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. This is the grasping and holding, yeah. But then there's the other side of that, which is the desire of get rid of. I want to get rid of my anger and my this and my that and all that. So in this constant pulling and pushing, pulling and pushing, pulling and pushing. And that's what the Buddha said, that's what creates the suffering, this pulling and pushing. Yeah. But if we just be with that, when it's good, it's good. When it's bad, it's bad. Then that cessation of suffering is possible. Yeah. I sometimes talk about one of my favorite koans in the Gaelic Gate, which is everyday mind is the true way. And at the end of the koan, the punchline is when Zen Master Dae Kwang tells Joju, why do you make right and wrong? And that's our life, we're always making right and wrong. Yeah. So in that situation, just the important part is that you're sitting with it. Yeah. You're not avoiding the practice. Yeah. And that's our experience, especially in the retreat. Sometimes practice tastes like nothing. Sometimes and sometimes it sucks. Yeah. Especially if it's the summer and it's hot and you add all the extra stuff, And it's day 30 and you're sick of oatmeal. Or if you have a sweet tooth, then you're thinking about all the sweets and things, And you relish the peanut butter in the morning and the banana because of your sources of sweetness. Yeah. But Zen is just looking at that mind. Yeah. As the thing says, special transmission outside the sutras. Yeah. Pointing directly to the human mind. And that pointing directly is just to see that. Yeah. And what that sometimes does too is point us to do things that normally no effing way I'm going to do that. But it's interesting because it's reverse thinking, if you want to call it that. We're always, well, if they're nice to me, then I'll be happy. If only they smile and, they think I'm a great Zen master, a great this and that, and I'll be really happy. Yeah. But if you switch that, maybe if I'm nice to them, without expecting anything, then something may happen. So the practice makes us open to a possibility. I'm going to chant for my father for a week. I'm going to expect anything in return and see what happens. Yeah. So in addition to that, in our tradition and in Buddhism we talk about three things. Great doubt, great faith, and great courage. Yeah. So we're going to talk about that question piece. Yeah. Then the piece related to what you're going through is faith. Yeah. Because you read the teachings, you heard the teachings, you come to the Zen Center, you have a practice, you see what's possible. It's faith in that. But it's also faith in yourself because you've done the practice for a while, so you know what's possible. So in those hard moments, you hold on to that faith. But you also muster the courage to do it, because no one can do it for you. All the stuff I'm telling you may resonate, you may feel good, yeah, that's right. But until you do it, it's not going to be your experience, as we were talking before. And we need that courage to do it. So keep doing it. When it's good and when it's bad, yes, keep doing it. And just doubt, faith, and courage. Thank you for practicing. I think we have time for one more question, maybe.
So I have a question about non-attachment. So I have a very similar family situation to Bobby, where over time I've really struggled with my relationship to my parents, and there came a point where I feel like I worked through it and I was really able to put things down, and I'm at a point where in theory I can interact with my family in a way that feels constructive, where I'm protecting myself. But at the same time, I've reached a point where I just, it's become just a duty, where I'm I should call them, at least once a month. I even have a calendar entry. And most of the time, I just don't do it because my heart isn't in it anymore. So what's the difference between non-attachment and avoidance and how do you move past that?
Sorry, how are you feeling, Eva? Yeah. Family relationships sometimes tend to be hard. And families are those other human beings where we have a very close karma. Very close karma. Yeah. Somehow we're born into those families and we have that karma with them. Sometimes it's easy karma and sometimes it's a very hard karma to digest. Yeah. And you're talking about detachment versus avoidance. Yeah. And you also talk about duty. Yeah. So there are some relationships there, though, some connections with your parents. Yeah. Even we like it or not, the reason that you're here, the reason I'm here, the reason that any of you are here is because your parents somehow got together, made love or had sex or something, and boom. Yeah. And you appear. Yeah. Yeah. So there are some connections, some relationships with that. Okay? And at those situations, you try to do something for them, like Sansanim suggested, chant for your father, pray for your father or your mother, or just in that situation. Well, we mentioned that he did something a little different, and things softened. Yeah. But I think for me, sometimes what makes it hard is we have expectations, that if I do this, then my father will be nicer or my mother will recognize something. So we have all these expectations that put a barrier and a weight. And the other piece is that we have all these memories that we carry, this narrative of stuff that happened, and that get activated. And the reason we feel pain, it may not be necessarily to something that happened 20 years ago, because it happened 20 years ago, is because of that memory and the stuff that we still carry. Yeah. So seeing those things may help. Part of that is seeing it during practice. Some of that may be really heavy and needs some other type of help. Yeah. But if you see that in practice, it's possible to let go, and it's possible to just have the interactions with your parents when you see them or when you talk to them, and just keep, daughter to parents relationship. Zen Master Dae Kwang is in Korea. He has written a lot about those interactions with his mother. From a Jewish background, but he became a monk. So of course, his mother always, maybe to the last years of her life, was always wishing that he would have been, something else. And he talks about those struggles. But he also talks about seeing what her mother needed at certain times when he visited, and just did that. So it's not easy. It's not easy. But the avoidance is what creates a lot of that suffering too. So a Japanese teacher, Kubosi, said something interesting. Actually, that's better than what he said. If we attach to opposition, then anger appears. And if we attach to well-being, then greed appears. That's a very interesting observation. Yeah. Because we always either attaching to well-being, because of course we want to be happy and safe and all that, or opposition, these dislikes. So if we get too attached to that, then we're going to suffer. So part of this process, at least for me, is can we minimize some of our suffering? Because if that's there, if that anger is there, it makes it harder to connect. Yeah. So this practice is about this happiness, but we have all these ideas about what that happiness should be. Yeah. but it's more of a sustainable happiness. Again, so I was saying, if they're nice to me, then I'll be happy. But what the Buddha taught was, you got to understand the causes of the suffering. You have to understand that there is suffering. You have to realize the causes and abandon them. And then you have to practice. We haven't talked about the Four Noble Truths, but you have to practice. You have to do something. Yeah, it won't happen by itself. Maybe to some people. Yeah, and that's the Eightfold Path. Okay. So I strongly encourage you to have some type of practice. It doesn't have to be Zen, but have some type of practice in your life that allows you to, not get so involved with the mental narratives that we have. We all have them, we all have them. And as I say, these days it's very hard not to get not only involved in that, but being fed constantly by that. So having some type of practice where you can step back, and see that, I think that's very important these days. Zen is just one way, but any spiritual practice that resonates with you, then do it. Practice 5-10 minutes every day, and develop that discipline. And if you find the courage and the faith in something, then practice a little longer. Take advantage of the Sangha. Bobby mentioned two things. That one is when he discovered the practice, he found something to hold on to, like the image of the raft with the Buddha. Yeah. He was drowning, or his head when he was happy, and when he was not happy, he was drowning, but he found the practice. Yeah. And then he says, I was doing solo practice, blah, 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 blah. But then I discovered practicing with others, and that's the Sangha. And that, to quote you, used something like, it gave me a stronger anchor, So he went from having, a little flotation device to having an anchor, And that's the value of the Sangha, And that's what we have. All of us, we support each other, Just by being here, by sitting, just by asking questions, So I encourage you to take advantage of that. May you all be happy, and may you all be free from suffering.
Thank you for your wonderful talks. Just a few announcements. In terms of the retreats that we have coming up, our next retreat is a Christian Buddhist retreat with Zen Master Tan Gong, and that is in early November.
November
15th.
Say something about that retreat. You may hear the word Christian Buddhist, and some of you say, not Christian. That's not for me, but actually 90% of the retreat is the same as our retreats. We sit and walk, eat in silence, all the same. Okay. The only two things that are slightly different are interviews, but the interviews are with me and Sister Madeleine. Sister Madeleine is a Dominican nun that has been practicing Zen for a long time. She's a sensei. And she's a riot. She's great. So coming for interviews with her, you can ask all these questions, and you get, as you were saying, with the different teachers, you get a different perspective. Right? And the other thing that's different is at the end, rather than having a circle talk like we normally have in our retreats, we have a Q&A. Yeah. So you get like this. But apart from that, it's just sitting and walking and sitting and walking. So it's just another opportunity for you to do a one-day retreat. Thanks, Eva.
The other thing about the retreat is that it is offered in hybrid format, so you can actually join online, and we have at least one person online already, so it will be offered online. And then if you're not able to do that retreat, we will have a 7-day YMJJ retreat. in December with Zen Master Songhyang, Bobby Rhodes. If you don't know, Zen Master Songhyang is the head of the Global Quantum School of Zen. And she comes here every year for that retreat. That retreat is a 3-day minimum, and it's a traditional Zen retreat with the formal meals and all the bows that you get to do every morning. So highly recommended if you want to take your practice to the next level. Other than that, we have our usual practice every Wednesday night. Twice a month we have Kongan interviews, and then once a month there are consulting interviews. I don't know off the top of my head if we have consulting interviews next Wednesday. Maybe, I don't think so. In any case, you can look up all that information online. And we have art club this afternoon. So if you want to stick around, it's in the pagoda. You don't need to bring art supplies. You don't need to know how to do art. She can do like 100 different types of art and can teach you like literally. So check that out this afternoon. And I believe the gift shop will be open. I saw Carol. Oh, yeah. Last but not least, in December, we have a Buddha's Enlightenment Day. It's at the end of the YMJJ retreat. And at that point, you can take precepts. So if you've completed at least 4 days of retreat in the Quantum School of Zen, you can take precepts. If that's something you're interested in, please talk to Zen Master Tan Gong. And you would apply and then take precepts that day. And I think that is only in person, so you do have to be here for that. As Diego, who used to do Nasma, used to say, Dharma is free, but electricity and food and soon it will be cold. Heat is not free. So please consider making a donation or becoming a member of the school. Thank you very much, and enjoy I assume we have refreshments outside.
Yes.
Thank you.
Just a small square, everything else can throw over there.
Oh, okay, so that needs to connect with the These are right things. At least you have that one. I know.
That's right.
Hey, grab a cushion, sit yourself up, okay? So you got the equipment, I'll show the order. I was thinking about this after I made the office. You know, you can get great So there's something about the human body. I think this is unique. This is one. So some of our cities have that component. But there's also unnecessary suffering. And today, when I came in, I only had one session. They're all gone. The reason I say I was a little upset is that when I sit, I'm like, oh, okay, to do that, maybe at 10 a.m. Normally, so my point